an AI agent, that's more built for a singular task versus an agentic system or multi-agent orchestration. And we have ways within our platform to visualize the actions an agent takes. Typing out a prompt, structuring an agent behind the scenes, some of that initial test, that initial proof, and we can scale these things up in a matter of days and say, hey, look, we can replicate this across your entire supply chain.
But the planning is the important part. So where do you see the biggest inefficiencies is?
You have to then coordinate, talk back and forth with an inventory manager, like, actually, is this a problem? Right? How do we speak a common language across that entire ecosystem that, again, it's critical for AI models to be built on top of so that they can understand the thinking of a procurement manager versus a supply planner versus a transportation manager.
Explain me AI, the difference between AI agent, and multi-agentic orchestration in simple English.
The steps that were followed, where you failed, and how to self-heal, right? Because otherwise, if you're not autonomous, the sort of comparative to example to that is a human needs to look at the agent every time and say, hey, you failed here, reprompt it. And then instead of the human team of data science that have reinforcement models, there's ways within the LLM itself that, we have a concept called evaluation agents. So we have a series of agents, like agents that are built just to evaluate the performance of another agent.
So how agents can help us, from moving from the reactive to the proactive way of moving freight using AI recommendations.
Hey, I have 100 late shipments. Let me figure out what the problem is and which ones I really need to act on. Now they're observing the agent taking action on their behalf. And so I'd say, don't overthink it. You have to start, right? So planning and getting stuck in planning cycles and when will it settle? It's not going to settle.
What's the most hilarious human error your agent have fixed? So if one of your agent could roast a traditional logistic process, what would that be?
Oh, that's a good one.
This video is brought to you by us, SCM Dojo. We provide awesome courses, guides, best practices for supply chain community.
Hi folks, welcome to one more episode of the Supply Chain Show. As you know, a lot of people are talking about AI, right? But there's very few use cases and practical applications in logistics and supply chain. So I thought, who can I find somebody who can give me real insights that how AI and AI agents is working in logistics and changing the game, right? For that, I found Nick Douglas, who is a VP for Product and Network Design. He will talk about himself later on. Hard man to get, but he is actually in the forefront of making this change and basically using AI agent in logistics. So I want to basically welcome Nick. How are you?
I'm doing fantastic. Pleasure to be speaking with you today.
Good. I like your background. Pretty cool, man. I mean, this is pretty cool stuff.
Yeah, I'm in the merchandise mart in Chicago. Behind me is the original door at original office for Project 44. So it's a big wooden fixed door on the wall here. But yeah, great setup today for the conversation.
Okay. So everybody's talking about AI agents. It's been in the business for, AI agents in the last 2-3 years, right? So what fundamentally has changed, right, from your perspective in last 2-3 years?
Yeah, I would say a couple of things. First, the foundation models have just leaps and bounds improved, right? So before, what it took to actually get an agent to be specific and applicable in supply chain, you had to do a tremendous amount of prompting. Those models have just improved drastically. You look at any benchmark and just leaps and bounds in the last 1.5 years especially. That's number one. Number two, the tooling around it. So, the frameworks have been established, the tools like observability that come off the shelf. Now it's easier and easier for anybody to build an agent, at least a primitive one. And then three, I'd say that the appetite from the enterprise shipper is there. Before, they were interested in experimentation. Now the mandate for ROI is in place and for real use, as we're talking about. So I think both the technical side as well as the market readiness are all in place. And it's a very exciting time for deploying agents at scale.
So, but the AI is not new and the using of machine learning and analytics not new. So I just want to know why the traditional AI or machine learning or analytics did not deliver. Maybe a quick view on that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think as you look at that traditionally, you got outputs that was just information, right? So analytics tells you an insight. But what's really interesting now with the advent of large language models and these big foundation models is that they can reason. They can think, they can take context and say, okay, you said A, but I know you actually meant B, which is super important. And I would say the action that can be associated is also foundational. As we talk about agentic execution systems, not just giving somebody the insight of here's the performance of your carrier, but what do I actually do about it, right? And baking in that execution is what is so different from a dashboard to an agent that actually can autonomously take a decision and an action on behalf of a customer.
So do you think the industry is finally moving from like experimentation to real execution? You can see the appetite is there, that we are not no more just talking about slides and it might happen.
Yeah, and it's actually just like the progression in the foundation models I mentioned happening very quickly. I would say the readiness to move from experimentation is happening quickly with our customers, especially. There's still some that are slower coming around. They're in the tinker or the experiment phase, but we have a number of co-innovation partnerships right now where customers are deploying. So they again, it's in the fiscal year budgets for this year to realize the gains, right? So they have already done the tinkering, they have done the experimentation. People are familiar with, the ChatGPTs of the world in their personal life, and that's made it, sort of a tailwind coming into this year, especially where we do see that customers are now moving from experimentation into action. And excited to talk about some of those use cases with you today.
Yeah, I mean, I was fortunate to have Jet on my podcast, I think, a few months earlier, right? And between me and him, we recorded that. And on the back of this, I wrote a blog, and I presented a concept of this crawl, walk, run, right? And I think, especially in North America, maybe some in Western Europe, the companies now has gone past the crawling stage, right? I think they should be either walking or maybe running, right? I think that needs to happen. Is relatively, if you compare the speed of change in tech, and as you said at the start, how fast the models has grown, right? I mean, I don't want to name names, but I'm watching what cloud is doing in the reasoning space, especially the analytical space. It is mind blowing, right? I end up canceling my Chat GPT and moving to cloud, right? But Project 44 essentially is a visibility platform, right? And again, you moving towards decision intelligence. That's the discussion we have with Jet, and I'm going to come back on this and we expand on the few new things they're doing. But if I work for Bridgestone, right, and that Bridgestone was your customer that I was working. I'm not sure Eaton is your customer or not, but visibility was a problem. But I do a lot of consulting and training, and actually this morning I have a call with my Saudi, who's my customer, Saudi tire distributor, $100 million company, right? And he said, you need to come up with the option how we can implement proof of delivery, right? I mean, people still don't have a basics of visibility, right? So while we're talking about AI agents, and then there's a big market who's still firefighting with this visibility challenges, right? I see there's a big chasm between on the maturity levels, right? What's your view? Because you're an insider. I want to pick your brain on this.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's interesting because you're right. And there's a number of people who are still skeptical, or their tech stack is still, I would say, primitive in the sense that they're reactive to it. They have a lot of human processes. An interesting way to approach this, and I know we'll talk a little bit about like an AI agent, that's more built for a singular task versus an agentic system or multi-agent orchestration. And really what I think the entry point for some of these customers who are still coming around to the new wave is taking a single agent built for a more prescriptive task, right? So saying, hey, you're going to have some process to do a POD retrieval, right? But we actually can show you, and we have ways within our platform to visualize the actions an agent takes. Typing out a prompt, structuring an agent behind the scenes. Some of the technical can go over the head of, your average user. But through the user interface, we bring customers along and say, here are the steps we're taking. Oh, and by the way, this is just like you designing a process, right? But the interesting thing here is how we inject agents to take actions, right? An agent can, someone forgot to submit something. An agent can reach out via email, can ingest a document, can convert that into an API payload, and then hit our API automatically, right? So they can see this mirrors my process. This mimics what I do today. And I can see how an agent can be injected where there's a failure, or to completely, cover the process on behalf of what a user might be. So in that way, we think a lot about process and process steps, and that familiarity. It's not something new, grandiose. We're moving towards large-scale optimization in the supply chain. But the most rudimentary building block is simply replacing the task of a transportation planner, an inventory planner. And in that way, it helps bring people along, right? So that they can see, okay, I can leap from, I'm still trying to figure out how to use technology, to an agent can mirror what I would do it at scale, do it autonomously. And in that way, it's super interesting, right? You don't need to hire 10 more people as your business scales, because the agents, you can clone that agent and do these things autonomously at scale over your entire supply chain in real time. And it's not science fiction. Like that's we can show them in action. And what we do a lot of the times is that initial test, that initial proof. And, we can scale these things up in a matter of days and say, hey, look, we can replicate this across your entire supply chain. Now we have numerous agents. Then we get into multi-agent and orchestration. So it's a natural that, the crawl and walk actually shrinks quite a bit. We can, show the proof of value to the customer within quite literally a matter of days. And then getting to the run is really towards that multi-agent, where you take not a single process step, but the processes across your department, across your entire team, across your company. So it's interesting. Deploying agents in this way, tied to those processes, builds in that crawl, walk, run, sort of natively, if you will.
Yeah, I think you mentioned agents can take action, right? And you also talk about in your narrative, few examples, which is more execution, right? Mm-hmm. And also I think there's some decision part there. But the way I see that, right? If you think any normal supply chain logistics procurement work, right? So there's a planning stage, then execution stage, and based on that, you make decision stage, right? So, but the planning is important part. So where do you see the biggest inefficiencies is? I mean, it's clear that you are very pro execution and decision intelligence, right? Where I think you already answered part of my question where you've given very solid examples. But I think right now there is a planning efficiencies, there is planning inefficiencies. So how you see? I mean, do you agree with me? And if you agree with me, give me some.
Yeah, I do. It's interesting because I think the most inefficiency for me lives at the execution stage, but the impact of the inefficiency is amplified in the planning stage, right? If your plan's wrong across, you mentioned $100 million company, the inventory levels you have, the transportation spend that you have, over a yearly time frame, any inefficiency there is just on such an order of magnitude that solving those problems is most impactful typically and most valuable to the customer. And in that way, we're thinking about things like, how do we deploy agents to understand where you have lead time optimization opportunities, right? So you have your static, hey, all these lanes are 3 days, and then that builds buffer stock. You have, unnecessary, if you peanut butter spread and say, well, it generally happens like this. Or I did a study a year ago and that's how it looked. When you think about those inefficiencies and the ability, again, it's not run your consulting exercise for, once a year. You can say these agents, you work with a consultant, you work with a Project 44, you build this methodology, these agents out, and then they run in real time, right? You're not waiting for an annual process. You're doing that and you're adjusting to disruptions in supply chains, changes in your carrier base, et cetera. So I think to answer your question more directly, the biggest inefficiency in terms of dollar value lives on the planning side, but the highest frequency of inefficiency lives on the execution side, right? Where day-to-day, that hand-to-hand combat, across thousands of shipments, across modes and geos, the scale to address that, although lower dollar value on each one, collectively represents a big opportunity as well.
See, I'm a planning guy, because my background is sales and operations planning, end-to-end supply chain planning. Mm-hmm. And there's a debate, and I have this, I'm a chief evangelist of a AI-powered demand supply planning software called Plantrax, right? So I've got some advisory equity role there. And I also debate that in fact, I did the analysis over Christmas. I reviewed about 1,000 plus companies and who's got invested in last 10 years, right? 55 billion money coming into supply chain space, a lot of VC money coming in. But surprisingly, 45 billion of it was logistics, not procurement. I mean, planning was just there with 2.6 billion, right? And there was nothing about procurement. I mean, it sounds like procurement is very important, blah, blah. Now, the point I'm making is following. There's a lot of cash sitting in inefficiencies in this. And despite Project 44 being around for a long time and the visibility is a big thing, right? I still think there's a lot of fragmentation of data, right? Which is people still firefighting in reality, right? I know your focus is big companies, Fortune 500 above, but I'm just want to, as a product design, as a network design person, you're a product person as well. I want to pick your brain, not just in the context of Project 44, in the context of industry. So how you see, I feel there's still fragmented data. I still think people firefighting. What do you think?
Yeah, no, I would agree with you. It's interesting, especially as, we started in visibility and primarily for the transportation manager, but you take that same, the same shipment moving and you flip it on its head and say, well, there's a supply manager, right? Who's focused on making sure the inventory levels are set correctly. There's the demand forecaster who upstream from that said, where do we expect demand to materialize? And what's interesting is we've looked at it, movement, it's a single pane of glass to see, movement, our platform, to see shipments from many different angles. What's interesting when you first engage with customers is and you understand their processes before they start to work with us, and more broadly speaking about the industry today, it is fragmented, right? And I'll take a simple example of, you have a transportation manager who says, hey, this is going to be late to the appointment. Okay, my order on there is going to be late, but the context around that, is that actually late to the PO due date?
Yes.
And then how much buffer time is there between the PO due date and a downstream inventory set, as an example? So you as a transportation manager say, hey, I'm getting pretty close to this, I may have a problem. But then you have fragmented data, fragmented information and context, importantly, where you have to then coordinate, talk back and forth with an inventory manager, actually, is this a problem, right? And that's human-to-human conversation on everything that ever runs late to understand, is a problem really a problem? And that's one microcosm of, is the data fragmented? Then you go all the way upstream into, freight planning and you have procurement managers, et cetera. Everybody has a slightly different pain of seeing goods flow through the supply chain, bringing that together. And we think a lot in the data, the data foundation we've built. And then we'll talk a little bit today about semantic layer. How do we speak a common language across that entire ecosystem that, again, is critical for AI models to be built on top of, so that they can understand the thinking of a procurement manager versus a supply planner versus a transportation manager. Everybody looking at the same thing a little bit differently. But I do think AI both helps that data fragmentation, but it's just so foundational that you have a semantic layer built on top that translates all that language that people have spent 30 years building up in each of these roles in a supply chain.
Agree. So I want to move discussion towards more, AI agents, and I think the data side, right? Because I think it's hard to get, and this is the unique positioning of our podcast, right? Because a lot of people keep discussion on a high level, non-technical, but I think this has to be deep technical discussion needs to happen, and a lot of people are interested. At least our community is interested, right? So having said that, just very high level explain for, if I'm let's call it a guy who's working for supply chain logistics for 40 years, but my technical knowledge is pretty rudimentary. I have a basic English knowledge and business knowledge. Explain me AI, the difference between AI agent, and multi-agentic orchestration in simple English.
Yeah, the easiest way is AI is the brain, right? You can think about these large language models. That's the brain that does the thinking. The AI agent is the hands, right? So you actually have, and you can think of the equivalent as the worker. You have an employee that can actually go and do tasks for you, can execute, can use that brain plus those hands to go, solve a problem. And then when you think about multi-agent orchestration, it's the full team, right? You have a series of people with that very powerful brain who can take action autonomously. So it sort of scales up from there. Without the brain and agents, nothing. But without the multi-agent orchestration, you can't actually operate your supply chain. So it sort of flows through brain to hands to full team.
No, perfect. I think you partly answered this, but I want a slightly more detailed answer also. What makes AI agents autonomous? Because the thing is, Laura, she's a big supply chain, critic as well, and also a researcher. I think somebody talks about autonomous supply chain, and she really have a go at that person, right? And some of the big startups are using, or companies in this domain using autonomous supply chain. And I'm also a skeptic about this. Yeah. So I'm not a big fan of autonomous supply chain, just simply because I work in industry for 17 years and I know there's so many factors that at least it will not happen in my lifetime. I hope, maybe, but probably not. But I do believe that AI agents can work truly in an autonomous fashion to perform a certain process or certain task end to end, right? So
yeah, absolutely.
My question is, so they're more than assistant. So what makes them more than assistant?
Yeah, I would say there's two primary things: the ability to take action and the improvement, right? So a feedback loop where they learn on their own, right? And it's similar to an employee, right? You have an employee start day one. They don't necessarily know how to run your processes, but you enable them to take an action by teaching them an SOP. Now they have the context of the job they should be performing. And over time, they get feedback from a mentor, from a peer. Hey, you approached it this way. Some of the nuance you might have missed that's not written in the SOP that makes it so difficult to automate an entire supply chain. Here's the context around that, right? On how we operate here, what happens on Friday afternoon when the carrier doesn't pick up, and that's not written in the SOP. That self-improvement is over every single instance, understanding the job that was supposed to be done, the steps that were followed, where you failed, and how to self-heal, right? Because otherwise, if you're not autonomous, the sort of comparative to example to that is a human needs to look at the agent every time and say, hey, you failed here, reprompt it. And then instead of the human getting time back for more value-add activities, all you're doing is updating prompts, right? So what truly makes it autonomous, and I think one of the keys here is that self-reinforcement, that self-learning, that is autonomous, right? And not a human just tinkering behind the scenes.
Yeah.
So for me, that's one of the biggest differentiators between something that is human managed versus autonomous.
So how they do self-learn? This again, just if you want to explain technically, explain me, because not many people can actually know how they actually self-learn and self-improve. What do you think?
Yeah, there's a series. So if I had my data science colleagues here, so I partner with a team of data science that have reinforcement models. There's ways within the LLM itself that, we have a concept called evaluation agents. So we have a series of agents, like agents that are built just to evaluate the performance of another agent. And what they do is they say, okay, one agent simply looking, let's say we identify whenever there's a phone number prefix, talking about a voice agent. There's a prefix that is a French country code. Whenever that happens, we should call in French, right? Because the user is most likely to be French. And if they speak English, we'll pivot. So we say there's a deterministic thing that must happen. Right. So an evaluation agent is built to say, make sure it spoke the right language. And then there's another one, and that is just, hard-coded, if you will. Then there's another that uses an LLM that says, hey, did you accomplish the goal in the most efficient way? So you prompt an agent to review the action of another agent and say, were you operating as I would have expected? And there's some, evaluation frameworks you build within that it sort of comes out with an answer on, did I do poorly? Did I do well? You have this series of evaluation agents, and what you can actually do is take the outputs from them and then build it back into the original agent and say, autonomously change the prompt, not the human changing the prompt, but where did this go wrong and why? And that evaluation agent framework, it resonates with customers, right? Because it's sort of the checks, right? It's the quality checks. Did it do the steps it's supposed to? Again, deterministic, there's things that must happen, as well as logically, if I was, grading a written test, right? There's no right or wrong if you use the right words. It's more, did you comprehend the problem correctly? Did you structure your thinking correctly? So if you think about in the US SATs, you have your math and your reading score. It's an equivalent where we have a series of agents that evaluate that on every single interaction that ever happens, feed that back into the original agent, and then it updates its behavior continuously. So that's how that autonomous scale occurs. I think that's a little bit into the technical, but without getting
that's great, because not many people. I think you explained pretty well. And if I just want to close this by saying, in my understanding, multi-agent orchestration is where multiple agents who have this, autonomy to do certain task or process, working together to get a certain process done. Is this correct?
That's exactly right. Yeah. And you think about your team, right? You have one person, you have a transportation team, one person's managing the Northeast, another person managing the Southwest. Collectively, all of these people, multi-agent orchestration, where they're managing the transportation for the entire company in the US, as an example. So that's the difference between the AI agent doing the singular and then the multi-agent, one comparative example of thinking about the team versus the individual.
Mm-hmm. So I want to move quickly now into, I think we covered theory a lot. So thank you very much. And I think you being super clear. So I really appreciate you there, right? But I want to cover some use cases, right? So I want to understand how this disruption prediction and the prevention works in the logistics area, right? So when the world is globally volatile, tariffs, now the Supreme Court has said something else, right? There is some what do you call it, war going on, or some kind of issues happening in the geopolitics, etc., right? So there's a lot of volatility, right? Okay, so how agents can help us, from moving from the reactive to the proactive way of moving freight using AI recommendations?
Yeah, absolutely.
Examples.
Yeah, so a great example, and we have a big ocean conference coming up next week at TPM. So maybe I'll use an example that we're going to highlight there is our rolled ocean container use case. So as an example, we have a solution today where, again, providing visibility, we can tell a user when there's a problem where a container may have rolled at a transshipment port, meaning it got off of one vessel, was waiting to be loaded on another vessel, and it missed that voyage. Now that's critical, right? Because that could sit there for a day, it could sit there for a week, and the context around whether that's a problem is related to the inventory that's sitting in that container. So where we previously would have surfaced an insight and enabled a user to take action, now we have that insight. We could do one of two things. Is there an actual rolled container, or did a carrier have poor data quality, meaning they were latent in sharing the information? So we can reach out autonomously and verify. We can contact the carrier and confirm that the container is rolled. Then, with the platform we built, we have a solution called sailing schedules. We can find the next available booking, bookable sailing, so that we can say, hey, instead of waiting for this to get figured out by some unknown person in your global supply chain, we can recommend and then autonomously take an action to book the sailing on your behalf. Now that, in context of, do I actually have a problem, or is this, stock that's not needed for a couple more weeks, right? So understanding in our reasoning models, is this inventory that's required on a deadline, or is it something, that, again, there's enough safety stock to cover through? Having all of this signal takes it from, hey, there's a problem and someone's got to spot it, and we can surface it, but someone's got to log into a dashboard and see that. Now the agent's verifying that the problem is real, providing you with options. And this is where we get to a little bit of, should it take autonomous action or should it provide a recommendation? We're building for both. So we'll allow within guardrails, let's say, there's a marginal cost impact as an example. Then we could say autonomously book. Or if it's over a certain level, have the human in the loop surface the issue, the context around the issue, the recommendation on a new bookable, sailing. And then, in that way, we move from somebody sees the data, they take it offline and go figure out what to do, to we have that all the way through to execution, because the value is not realized until an action is taken, right? So that's where we think the important difference comes in that rolled container use case as an example.
So in this use case, by the sound of this is not just one agent working autonomously. It's like multiple agents working together to deliver the output you explained. So it's a good example of the multi-agentic orchestration.
That's exactly right. And what we find in general, and I think, most people in the industry will say, is you can build an agent to do everything. But if you think about compounding error, right? If there's a very small margin of error on step 1 and you have step 2, 3, 4, 5, by the time you get to the end and you have an agent that does such a wide, if you had one team member managing all of your end-to-end supply chain, they make mistakes, right? They can never be an expert in any given area. When you build a built-for-purpose agent that does one specific high-quality task, and then you coordinate them together, each of them becomes excellent at its job, and then overall, the orchestration is what makes the process sort of fulfilled. Right. So, yeah, it is a good example, and it sort of highlights the design principle of built-for-purpose agents that are orchestrated across, a process.
No, that makes a lot of sense. But at the end, am I right in saying that, you have plenty of integrations, right, to make your platform work. So essentially, you are a system of records for logistics, at least for your customers. Am I right in saying that?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Now, the planning, execution, and decision intelligence of an agent or multiple agent really depend on the data quality.
Mm-hmm.
Like what's available, right? So there's a data quality, what's in your system, which I think you can control, but there's a data quality of the external sources, right? And pardon my language has been the word which we say crap in, crap out, right? Yeah. So if you're gonna, there was a very good meme going around on internet, on LinkedIn, where, what we call it, a crap sandwich, right? Where the AI is just magnifying that, right?
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
I think the continuous improvement of the data quality is of the prime importance to make sure agents, what they're planning, executing, and, enabling you to make better decisions, they can be only effective if the data quality is good. So how are you getting around that data quality issue?
Yeah, well, I know we said we'd sort of build on my intro a little bit as we go. Background for me, I've spent 6.5 years at P44, and data quality has been a through line for me. So it's always been, for me, to your point, crap in, crap out. Unless I can deliver for my customers high quality data, they're not going to trust any of the decision intelligence we're providing to them. So actually, for me, where we started with building agents is on data quality issues. So we have at Project 44 a solution called root cause analysis. We're in a very deterministic, software-driven way. We were saying we can codify, hundreds of bespoke errors that each individually impact visibility, right? Whether that's the completeness of the data, the latency of the data, whether the data is available at all. And so what we did with the very first agents, our own crawl, walk, run, is saying, hey, we know these problems pretty well. The challenge is we don't have the humans that, I don't have an entire workforce to say, call up every carrier, email every carrier, fix every problem. We'd love that they all log into the platform and, sort of self-heal and self-service. But when that doesn't happen, what do? We tell customers, focus on the 80-20 rule. With AI agents, we fix that, right? So now we know what the problems are, even before the AI model. Now they can tell some of the more complex ones, but we just need the execution at scale. So we've built dozens of agents that are purpose-built to solve individual issues. So you have a missing pickup milestone, or you have an improperly formatted pro number in LTL transit or LTL transportation. No matter what that error is that results in low quality or incomplete data, we've built quite literally armies. We have tens of thousands of outreaches going out every day to carriers, and we tailor this via email, via phone, via SMS, in the language that they speak at the time they want to be contacted, the specific contact a customer works with, to solve this problem at scale. And why that's so important, ensuring we have agents fixing the data quality. So that when I talk about a rolled container use case, we don't have actually every time we go to verify something, it's just bad data quality, right? So now instead of having agents fixing your supply chain, you just have agents verifying that we got the wrong data signal. By having it core to the platform, that baked in, we have agents improving and making visibility work, if you will. Then everything we build on top of that, to your point, high quality data foundation, high quality recommendations, high quality action. So I think you said we have 5 hours. I can talk about data quality for 4 hours and 40 minutes.
No, we don't have much time, because we need to really move to the business end of the discussion, right? I think I love talking to you, but any podcast more than 45-50 minutes is a bit too much. But good for shorts. It's good for shorts, right?
Yeah.
So what we covered so far, you've been very kind to explain the AI agents, multi-orchestration. You've given some really good examples of, explain how to make the autonomous agent, how they work, how they, benefit the humankind and the supply chain logistics in general. You explained this pretty well. And then now we covered the data quality, why it's important. Mm-hmm. And I think we should do a separate podcast on this, because I can see you're super passionate about it. It's a painful topic, right? But I think we should think about it separately. But for now, I think you've done a great job in making me excited and others excited. But here's the thing. It's slightly off script, I would say. I saw a post from Chris Leon, who's a VP. I think he's a GM for the agentic AIs in supply chain. He posted something which actually within 4 hours gone pretty viral. I would say it's got like 500 engagement and stuff. And he's coming up that the companies who vendors who are the owners of system of records, right? Who owns the data, okay, are sitting on a let's call it a lot of power and opportunity. And I think they're sitting on, I'm going to use this word, I think they're sitting on gold mine, right? Let me give you an example. Based on my research, Project 44 is dealing about 1.5 billion shipments annually, right? So technically you're sitting on the biggest data in terms of transportation and logistics, right? So you have the access to contextual data, you have the access to what humans are doing, what shipments are doing, so on and so forth. Okay, so where you see the biggest opportunity, considering the data quality discussion we already have?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's you're right in all of those statements, and I think for me, that's where we opened with: is it planning? Is it execution? Where's the inefficiency? I think taking that massive data gold mine and working more and more on large scale supply chain optimization. So less about the execution of each individual shipment or order, but looking at the design of your supply chain, the carrier mix that you use, the modal mix that you use. That's where the real benefit comes in, and we have every geo, every mode, every vertical, like that nuance that you mentioned, your view on autonomous supply chain. Part of getting to us, part of what makes it difficult is that every supply chain is so different, but we have years of the data on what makes those supply chains so different. And we have built up the data foundation that allows, if you asked a large language model, take a Fortune 500 customer, fix the supply chain, it's not going to give you a very good answer. But if you say, with the context of years of transit, of orders, of inventory, of shipments across modes, take this context of how their supply chain works, write a very prescriptive goal on what you're trying to solve for in terms of a budget reduction or a cost reduction, if you will. Now, the power of the LLM can be harnessed using that contextual data, and you can get to real, we're talking big dollar optimization. So we're very happy with where we started the company and the gold mine that we have. And I think gold is the exact right way to present that. And we're super excited.
I'm super excited. As I have a very frank conversation with Jet, candid, and I think we talk about few challenges of how people think. But as I said at the end, you criticize startup entrepreneurs however you like, or companies like Project 44 who has literally, there's open people's right about you raised 900 million or, a lot of funding and still challenging. I think it's credit to the vision of the first, the leadership, which includes you and Jet and everybody else, and the investors who know that eventually this gold mine this golden egg will come. And I think that's how it is now. So super excited, right? But now I want to move the view of your customer side, right? So in front of our eyes in 7 days, you've gone from a visibility, which is still reactive, then the thing needs to happen, right, to more proactive, right? So from more manual that somebody has to do stuff to more, orchestrated work, right? You've gone from, okay, I'm going to tell you to report something, I'm going to give you oversight. So give me a day in life of your customers. How it's changed?
Yeah, it's interesting. And I think it's on the crawl, walk, run, like the customer's still in the crawl, but I'll take the ones who are walking and running. Really, with what we've built, they're at the point where, we want them to be understanding the actions of agents, which are built within their processes. And we're still work to do to cover every supply chain process across every department and geo and mode, if you will. But now they're able to observe an agent taking action. Up front, they're able to configure it, put in their guardrails, but instead of taking action on, hey, I have 100 late shipments, let me figure out what the problem is and which ones I really need to act on. Now they're observing the agent taking action on their behalf. They're in the loop, in the human in the loop model, to say, hey, I approve of these actions being taken. And they're sort of sitting back and watching their supply chain a bit on autopilot, if you will. And now we see them taking on higher order projects. What do I do with the time back? It's getting towards more broad optimizations, right? That project that, well, my day-to-day is always stop me from focusing on how I reimagine how my supply chain executes. That's where they're reallocating that time towards. And there's still growing pains along the way. They'll notice at some point, hey, we need to tweak that agent. There's some I mentioned evaluation agents. There's another thing that we may have missed, right? And as you talk to customers in different industries, different geographies, there's those things that come up. So we're still learning every day and learning with our customers. But I would say what they've gotten back is the ability to watch their workforce of agents execute on their behalf and reallocate that time that they would have spent in that firefighting mode. So it's super exciting and certainly a lot of value being realized across our customer base.
No, fantastic. I have a course on supply chain digitalization, right? And I have a very simple theory, right? So when anybody's creating a business case for supply digitalization, it has to do two things. It has to improve internal efficiencies. You give an example, right? Or it has to improve customer experience, better, faster delivery, better customer service. So what are the elements of customer service are? 4 of them, right? Or the use case at least has to do one, if not both. But I'm a big fan of the use cases of digitalization agents where the KPIs get impacted, right? Where you can see real bottom line impact to your bottom line, to your customer bottom line, right? And how your customers is getting service from you as a supplier plus the overall improvement of the KPIs to their supply chain. So they are, because you are essentially
absolutely.
your customers are manufacturers and shippers, right? Some big brand names. So the thing is, using your platform, their customer needs to see some solid improvement in their supply chain. So give me some examples. What's happening there?
Yeah, I would say, so we have a freight procurement agent, for example, from a cost reduction standpoint, that the market changes every day. What's your contract versus spot exposure? And how do we dynamically change your allocations so that we're maximizing your freight spend against your existing carrier base, or even kicking off, we think the legacy RFP process has been around for a long time, but it's archaic, it's slow, it's painful. How do we launch mini bids within cycles, right? So we can reallocate as market rates change, which they're changing right now, to help save cost directly, right? Every one of those actions is a dollar saved in many cases, or many dollars. And then on the I'd say on-time performance, right? At the end of the day, your customer needs product at a certain time, and what we found is you work with these large shippers, and the size and scale of their supply chain, it's sort of a crushing weight to keep up with. There's so many things that could go wrong. How do I do it all, right? So I think the ability to have your agent workforce that scales up, it's not about how many of the issues could I get to today. Well, you got to all the issues, and it's about, where do you spend the time to uniquely problem solve, or, solve one-offs as the end user. So I would say on the on-time delivery, we're seeing that our customers can take the necessary action to push their KPIs up, where before they just, hey, it's understood that you can only get to 60 to 70% of the work in the day. Now it's 100% every time. So, there's still things that miss. There's still failures in the real world that an agent can't control, but it's not because we didn't have the scale to do it. We didn't know what the problem was. We didn't understand the severity of the problem. So I think those have started, we've seen some percentage point uptick in terms of on-time delivery for our customers as well that are deploying an agent workforce.
Nah, fantastic. But the thing is, there's historical vendors, people are using a lot of ERP and stuff, right?
Mm-hmm.
And people are still into this concept of built-in versus bolt-on, right? So what's your view on that?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think we can support both. We're built in, so core to our platform and our data architecture is the ability to take action, right? Because we mentioned starting as a visibility company, but around that, we've always supported the freight execution lifecycle, right? Things like rating and booking shipments, which allows you to actually take an action built in. And at the time, we'd offer, someone say, hey, you can plug into your TMS and you can get more rates, or you can facilitate bookings. And the value was the integrations are much faster. But using that at its core, right? We've built out this suite of API connectivity where if there's a problem, baked into the core of visibility, sitting right next to it is the ability to book a new carrier, to reroute a shipment, and so all of these solutions that we built around visibility from our standpoint is execution baked in. When you try to bolt on top, agents and AI models more broadly can solve a lot of data gaps and fragmentation, but you hit a point where you layer on and you layer on and you layer on, and you're only as good as crap in, crap out, right? If your systems don't talk really well within your own stack, it takes quite a lot of work to get agents set up to overcome that hurdle. So for us, having that execution built in, not bolted on top, is a major differentiator, and it just makes it seamless that the AI model can work well from day one, as opposed to spending many weeks or months getting it to understand how complex and disjointed your system can be when you get more of a bolt-on model.
No, so I think a good expanded part B of the same thing. You've been to Gartner, you've been leading, and I think you're in the game for a long time. We already talk about how much data you have. So what advantage you have versus any new entrant? Because there's always, I'm keep hearing about, startups in this area. So where it positions you? You've got some moat in that sense.
Yeah. It put very simply, it's the gold mine you talked about. It's the data moat. Because, now I've done my own vibe coding, and you can build, sort of lightweight things very quickly. And, there's no denying that. The barrier to build something is greatly reduced. But I think what you can't replicate is, 11 years of 1.5 billion shipments, right? The context of what happens in a supply chain, which, you can replicate different software applications in a weekend, literally. Some of the, there's fun viral stories about that, but you cannot replicate 11 years of, we're talking 15 billion, if you quick math, whatever that would be, billions and billions of shipments. And it's not just one region, it's not just one vertical, but having that global view of the supply chain. The moat is the data, and what we build on top of that is so much more powerful versus just using an off-the-shelf AI model, given all that rich context it has, which, that data moat represents.
Right. No, perfect. again, extending this part, given you are a leader of product strategy and network design, so what's something exciting coming in from the product road mapping next 12 to 18 months? I mean, if you can share, I mean, it's if not super secret project.
Yeah, we're thinking, it's interesting, right? Because you mentioned there's a lot of upstarts in the industry, and it's like, how can we disrupt ourselves? And I think, we built an application that has many, many solutions. And I think simplifying that is something that's top of mind for us, right? You look at these modern interfaces. Like right now, if you log into Movement, you can get any job done that you'd ever need. But we're thinking a little bit about, what does the future of the interface look like, and how do we overhaul that? So you don't even need to know what you're looking for. You can use natural language as an example to help prompt your way towards that. So that's one big, what does the user experience look like? That's number one. And then number two, there'll be announcements coming out in coming weeks and months, but I would say that large scale optimization, it's not easy. Anybody that claims, hey, we can come optimize your supply chain off the shelf. I think to your point, autonomous supply chain is more of a dream than a reality, but using that data moat that we have. And I think, you talk about planning, a lot more endeavors into the planning optimization, right? We know where all the freight is. We know how it moves. We know how carriers perform both in your network and outside. So thinking about larger scale supply chain optimization, moving away from execution and further upstream, that's where, our roadmap will head for sure. And without a doubt, multi-agent orchestration, autonomously acting systems that are self-healing. Like this is, it's not science fiction or things of the future. Like it's here and now. I think as we move further upstream into some of the more complex and very, very nuanced details of planning, it's exciting, what we'll be able to help our customers with in short order here.
I mean, I'm glad you talked about UX UI, because I think I was reading the article on TechCrunch from, I think one of the chief product in Google, right? And he said, if a wrapper app would just die, the vibe code wrapper app, and the integrator LLM app would die as well. You have to have your own IP built on Gemini or a cloud or any other model as well, which sure. You have. So, and then this article also mentioned AI startup, legal AI startup called Harvey.ai. So I just went and look. I think what they have done for the whole lawyers and lawmakers and, the paralegals, and just have a look, man. Their UX UI, based on the legal data, is amazing, right? And when I saw, they were like, why? I mean, we could do this in logistics. And while I'm talking to you, listening to you, right? And I just got an inspiration in my head, right? If imagine we got, all the good things of Project 44 and multi-agentic orchestration and the data layers you talked about and the whole, C Act inside, but with the UX UI of Harvey, right? Have a look. You might thank me later, right?
And no, I will. Absolutely. And
Harvey.ai. They wrote $1 billion with that AI. Yeah, Harvey.ai. Perfect was about $1 billion, right? Anyway, so, but I want to be already for 50 minutes now, so I want to move discussion towards the end. So my second last question is, this is great. What you said is great. Great to see your customer using, right? I talk to a lot of people, especially Middle East and, Europe and all that. There is a lot of, people are conservative, right? They don't trust. And but trust will be my last question. But before I come to my last question would be, the rate of adoption of AI, despite its availability and getting cheaper and faster and agents and etc., I think the rate of adoption is way slower than the rate of innovation and development, right? So what's your message to executives, right? And again, we talked about this, crawl, walk, run, which that philosophy is there. But in addition to that, what you would say?
Yeah, it's a good question. Sometimes I feel, even preparing for this podcast is like, do I know all the latest and greatest? Because if you're not online reading blogs and listening to podcasts every minute of every day, it's quite literally that fast that you're missing out on innovation. So I'd say don't overthink it. You have to start, right? So planning and getting stuck in planning cycles and when will it settle? It's not going to settle. The pace of change is going to continue to accelerate. So I'd say pick a lane to start in. And when you, like within our own network operations department, we just need to start, right? We started with the tinker, give everybody the freedom and the space to try and accelerate past that once you find a nugget. It may be the right nugget, it may be the most important nugget, or maybe it's something that's, just marginally incremental. But once you get that rhythm within the team, you get that excitement, that commitment, that action, people start to understand the context around how these models work, what they're capable of. They're wowed when they see it, even on a small scale. And then that's what builds that rhythm of execution, and you accelerate that adoption curve. So you got to start somewhere. Don't overthink where you start. Starting is the most important, and don't wait for tomorrow. Start today. That's a bit generic in terms of advice, but it's played out every time I have someone internal or a customer is like, I can talk a big game. Let's go do it together. Start on day one, and I promise you, as you come along, you'll understand that the true power of what is being created and evolving every day in front of us.
So my last question is rather challenging and intentionally, right? So I work for a multi-billion-dollar company. Bridgestone was massive, Eaton was massive, and I know the decision to adopt any tech, like before, it take easily 12 to 18 months because the red tape is too high, the security, the stakes is too high. PLC, you're a public limited company, you can't things goes to, especially anything which impact your customer service, your customer impression, they can't afford to go wrong, right? Because it just it ruins you down big time. But and I think convincing a CEO of a SMB of even $50-60 million top line sales, running a successful business of 200 people is easier. You just basically convince a top guy. If he's convinced, it's going to go down. Everybody has to use it, right?
Yep.
But that's not the use case I'm talking about. I'm talking about the use case of your customers. They are all Fortune 500. If I remember from Jed, Coca-Cola, Pepsi, because I asked him this question quickfire, which I'm going to ask you, Coke or Pepsi. He said both because both are my customers. That's what I remember, right? But the point is, I just want to put myself into your customer shoes. I work for these big brands, and I've got this stack. If things goes wrong, it's on me because I'm the one doing it. So how you make this change management happen? Because I will be shit scared to go fully agentic and unautonomous.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think one of the big things up front, so we've proven it with some of the biggest brands who have the highest security concerns in the entire world. So we've already crossed that, as a proof point, some of the largest pharma providers in the entire world, right? And for them, you can imagine the RFP cycle you go through, the questions they ask, the security concerns they have. So we've known that this was the customer we were targeting, and we've built everything. We talk about execution built in versus bolted on. Same with security. Security is core to everything we do. I talk to our information security officers every single day. He's sitting off to the side here, probably hears me talking. We rigorously review each of these new technologies we're bringing in. We spent almost 2 years now methodically building to make it easier for the customer to trust. Now, if you compare that to startup vendor who says, maybe same pitch, right? Hey, we have all the capabilities in the world. Do you want to put your trust into an established brand working with the largest companies who has InfoSec at the core, or someone who's bolting it on sort of after the fact? For me, the proof points in, the brands that we work with who have those high hurdles, and we're consistently meeting them. But it's a challenge, right? Because as we said, you start to think about something like computer use as an agent using a computer. Well, you can do prompt injection, right? So there's new, and that would mean that a malicious actor puts some text that's hidden on the page, so the AI agent reads it and then takes some nefarious action. Those are things that we're on the cutting edge understanding, and we're building ahead of our customers. So as they're adopting this technology, we've solved that complexity for them. And it's not magic; it's hard work, right? It's a lot of human-led hard work to do so. But that's been a core principle of ours and why our customers trust us.
Random question before I go to my quick fire.
Sure.
Right? Do you or Project 44 have their own podcast?
We have a couple of forays where we've done podcasts, but I don't know.
Man, I think if you're Craig and the AV guy, I think you should start a podcast because the thing, the way you explain especially in supply chain context, very complex concept into understandable fashion, right, without getting too technical, I think it's brilliant, and I think you can do a pretty good job in explaining this to people. So a free session, and I'm going to help you. I mean, I'm happy to have you as my competition. Right.
I appreciate that very much. Some people, I thought you were going to say I had a face for radio, but that's a much higher compliment. So I appreciate it.
No, I would say your voice is for radio for sure.
I appreciate,
but I'm not going to comment on
that's fair.
Like the space that you work for Project 44 in good part of the fun. Now, but here you go. I'm going to read now quick fire question, and then we're going to drive to an end, right? And quick fire means quick fire. You can't go go along on this.
All right.
Okay. So that's where we're going to go. All right. Cool stuff. There you go. The first one. So on the scale of Excel spreadsheet nightmare to the fully agent orchestrated utopia, where is the average Fortune 500 supply chain today, and how fast is Project 44 dragging it to a good side?
Yeah, I think the end sort of
fully agentic.
The end of the question sort of indicates where it has always been closer to supply or spreadsheet nightmare, but I'd say we're actually making healthy gains, right? So I would say we were further indexed towards Excel. We're probably right in the middle, moving rapidly towards orchestrated utopia here shortly.
Nicely done. 50% right now it's a good place.
Yeah.
It's exciting enough to go forward, right? And inspiring enough to be where you are.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay, so what's the most hilarious human error your agent have fixed?
Oh man, there's, so when I started out doing this, there's, hundreds and hundreds of listening to audio recordings, looking at email transcripts. I'd say one of the ones that got fixed, actually it was this past Christmas season. There was a customer who had some inventory that they were trying to get to a retail store, and they didn't realize they scheduled the transit for 2026. So you know how to miss the 2025 set on the shelf? You scheduled a year out. The agent said, okay, we obviously don't think you're, based on your history, you've never planned anything 1 year out. You probably mean to do that this year. So auto-correcting some of those, booking details to pull it in allowed us to avoid a nightmare at Christmas time and maybe an empty stocking. So that was a pretty good one. I don't know if hilarious or not, but for me, meaningful and a little funny that there's errors like that still happen every day, right? And if you don't have agents, it's hard for humans to catch those things at scale. So how are they?
You're right. I'm pretty excited about this whole age of data quality, right? I believe when I was demand planner, I wish I had one, right? Because I used to spend so much time in cleaning that spreadsheet. It used to take a blood out of my body, right? Anyway, so
that's the Excel spreadsheet nightmare. Yeah, you were living in it at the time.
Yes. So if one of your agent could roast a traditional logistic process, what would that be?
Oh, that's a good one. I would say it's the expedite process, right? Because an agent laughs and says, "Hey, I already know that this problem is about to occur. Why are you lighting all these dollars on fire, with an air expedite? We should have known this problem weeks ago." So I would say that'd probably be where it's an impactful one too. And I'd say that's probably where they're roasting the supply chain process today.
I agree. Well, let's make a meme on this. Okay. So if you could automate one painful supply chain process tomorrow, what that would be?
It's got to be, I would probably say in the planning space, right? So the integrated business planning or S&OP process, like that's the holy grail for me. I'm sure with your background, you know that well. You're like, okay, Nick, what are we talking 50 years in the future? Maybe not so far, but it is such a multivariate, nuanced, human touch process that for me, getting to automation, powered by AI there is such an attractive problem to solve. So that's probably where I'd focus.
Good. Last one. Any books, podcasts, or any material you would recommend to the folks to learn about AI and supply chain, except me, of course, right?
Yeah. Well, I have 2 young kids, so I don't get to read as many books as I want. I would say in my spare time, I do a little bit more mix of supply chain and economics. So there's a gentleman, Jason Miller, that I follow on LinkedIn who does a lot of tariff impact on supply chain. So a little less AI. But for me, thinking about incentives, thinking about the economic impact, he's a good one. And then I also was just listening this morning, Freakonomics podcast. And again, it's outside the domain, but thinking about incentives. Incentives are everywhere. Thinking about incentives in adopting AI and deploying AI. I like to think outside of the space and then take that and apply it to the work with sort of an outside opinion, right? Because you can get into a bit of an echo chamber of the same. You got to take different application and apply it back to your work. So that's sort of how I like to approach that.
No, perfect. I do the same thing because I don't even listen to any supply chain podcast. And I've running the biggest channel on 135,000 followers we have. But I do listen to 2 kinds of course, AI, I'm listening a lot, learning a lot, both I have to. And then marketing people. How they create content, right?
Yeah.
And they talk about, because they are marketing influencers teaching people how to do digital marketing. And what I'm just doing is get inspired from either the way they make video or they conduct their podcast or the way they write the blog or think of a product. And I somehow adopt that into supply chain and it works because I know all that, supply chain, right? And
yeah, absolutely.
You have been great. Honestly, I think more than an hour gone, I couldn't feel it. I mean, I could talk to you for like 1 hour and half an hour, right? But maybe we schedule something for future, especially on I really want to tap on your experience on data quality. I think that itself could be a second, separate episode, but we will see about that. So thank you for your time. You have been amazing. Thank you for sharing your knowledge.
I appreciate it. Great conversation today, and I look forward to the next one. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Folks, hopefully you like this video. We're talking, with Project 44 and Nick, and he was very kind to share his really good knowledge. And so if you like this video, please leave a comment. If you have any questions for me and Nick, you can, check our descriptions here, and you can follow both of us on LinkedIn. And thank you for watching again. Thanks for your time. Take care. Ciao.
Thank you.